He has one of the most recognizable voices in the history of recorded music. Not the most powerful, there are more powerful voices. Not the most technically precise, there are more technically precise voices. But recognizable. The specific warmth, the unhurried baritone depth, the quality that arrives at the ear, with the sensation of being addressed personally by someone who knows something you need to hear and who is not in a hurry to finish saying it. You have heard it in a film, in a television commercial, in your parents' car on a long drive, in a wedding reception's final slow song. In 100 contexts you cannot individually name, the voice has reached you. And you may not have known, each time, who it belonged to. But you knew the voice. The voice belongs to a man born Arnold George Dorsey in Madras, British India, in 1936, who spent 30 years building a career that went nowhere significant under that name. Who survived tuberculosis and its 6 months of near death, who was told repeatedly by the industry that his moment had passed, who accepted a new name from a manager in 1965 that was so preposterous it was either going to end his career immediately or make him unforgettable forever, and who then, in January of 1967, appeared on a Sunday night television program and sang one song to the entire nation, and was never invisible again. That is the shape of the story. But the shape is not the story. The story is what happened inside the voice in those 30 years when nobody was listening. What the tuberculosis did to it. What the rejections did to it. What Patricia did to it. Because a voice of that specific quality, the warmth, the unhurried authority, the sense of someone who has lived enough to mean what they are saying, is not the product of talent alone. It is the product of everything that happened to the person the talent lived in. Have you ever heard a voice and known, before the words made sense, that the person behind it had been somewhere you recognized, somewhere difficult, somewhere private, somewhere that most voices have not been? Because that is the specific recognition that Engelbert Humperdinck's voice produces in the people who hear it. Not beauty, exactly, though the beauty is real. Recognition, the sound of someone who has earned the right to say what they are saying. But Madras comes first. And then Leicester. And then a boy who would become a singer before he knew he was going to be one. Arnold George Dorsey was born on the 2nd of May, 1936, in Madras, the capital of the Madras Presidency in British India, now Chennai, in the south of the Indian subcontinent. His father, Mervyn, was a British Army non-commissioned officer of Irish descent, stationed in Madras as part of the imperial military apparatus of the late colonial period. His mother, Olive, was of German descent. Arnold was the 9th of 10 children in a household that was large, musical, and organized around the specific, austere warmth of a military family in a foreign, posting the discipline of the father's world, modifying the warmth of a mother who sang and who understood, in the way that musical parents understand things, that there was something in her 9th child that was different from the others. When Arnold was 10 years old, the family moved to Leicester, England, following his father's discharge from the army. The Midland city would remain, for the rest of his life, the place he came from, the specific, working-class, post-war English city that shaped his understanding of what it meant to work for your living, to be modest about your gifts, to take whatever opportunity presented itself rather than waiting for the perfect one. He dropped out of school at 15. He worked as an apprentice engineer. He played the saxophone in nightclubs because the saxophone was available, and because the money the nightclub offered was better than the money the engineering apprenticeship offered, and because, in the specific hierarchy of his desires, playing music in a room full of people ranked substantially above metal fabrication. He was, by his own account, good with the saxophone. He was not immediately understood to be a singer. The singing began with a dare. He was 17. Someone at a pub told him to get up and do an impression. He did an impression of Jerry Lewis, specific, physical, completely committed. His friends called him Jerry Dorsey. The name became his professional name for the next decade, and the decade produced exactly what the name suggested it would produce. A career of moderate local success in British nightclubs and ballrooms, a recording contract with Decca in 1958, a single that did not chart, the specific, grinding experience of a man who is undeniably talented and who keeps finding himself in rooms that are not quite the right room. Have you ever had the talent without the context been genuinely good at something, recognizably good, while the mechanism that would connect that goodness to the audience that would receive it simply had not yet presented itself? Because that is the Jerry Dorsey years. Not failure, exactly, the absence of the right room. And then, in 1961, the right room was removed entirely. Tuberculosis arrived. He was 24 years old, building a career with the slow, patient accumulation of someone who understands that the work requires time, and in the span of a few weeks, his body became unavailable for any of it. 6 months in hospital. The specific, terrifying experience of a respiratory illness in a person whose instrument, whose literal, professional, income-generating instrument was the respiratory system. He has said, "I spent 6 months on my back in hospital. It was life-threatening." He said it with the flat precision of someone who has processed an experience so many times it has become part of the landscape rather than a dramatic event. Patricia Healey stayed. She was 17 when they met at the Palais de Danse in Leicester in 1956. He was 20. The meeting had the specific, instantaneous quality of the meetings that define lives the recognition before the language, the certainty that arrived before the evidence. She said yes to him when yes was not the obvious choice. She stayed with him through the tuberculosis when staying was the harder choice. She would stay for 57 years. He came out of hospital with less career momentum than he had gone in with. The industry's memory of Jerry Dorsey had not been preserved by his absence. He went back to the clubs. He was in his late 20s. He had a wife and a growing family and a voice that the nightclub audiences responded to, and that the recording industry had not yet found a way to package for a larger audience. He has described this period with the equanimity of someone who lived through it and came out intact. You just keep going. He said it the way a man says something that is the only available option, and that he has made his peace with being the only available option. Gordon Mills was a manager assembling a roster in the mid-1960s. He had already signed Tom Jones. He was looking for the next project. He found Jerry Dorsey in a club, heard the voice, arranged a meeting. And at the meeting he said what managers sometimes say to performers who have been in the industry long enough to know that the name is not working. The name is not working. Here is a new one, Engelbert Humperdinck. The name was taken from a 19th century German opera composer who had written Hansel and Gretel and who had been dead since 1921. It was, by any measure, preposterous. It was difficult to spell, difficult to pronounce, and entirely impossible to forget. Mills understood, and Dorsey understood, almost immediately after his initial resistance, that impossibility was the point. In a radio landscape organized around 2-second recognitions, a name that required effort to process was a name that stuck. You heard Engelbert Humperdinck, and you did not go, "Oh, another one of those." You went, "What?" And then you heard the voice. And then you understood. He became Engelbert Humperdinck in 1965. He was 29 years old. He had been in the music business for over a decade. He now had a name nobody could ignore, a manager who understood commercial architecture, and a voice that had been developing through the nightclub years and the recording failures and the tuberculosis and the return to the clubs into something that the voice had not been in 1958. Something deeper, something that contained more of what had happened to the person the voice lived in. That development is the part of the story that is hardest to quantify and most important to understand. A voice in its 20s is different from a voice in its 30s, not because the mechanism has changed, though the mechanism changes, but because the person has changed. The nightclub years deposited something. The tuberculosis deposited something. Patricia, with her certainty and her presence and her absolute refusal to leave when leaving was available, deposited something. And by 1965, at 29 years old, the voice of Arnold George Dorsey, now the voice of Engelbert Humperdinck, contained all of it. Have you ever reached a point in your life where the thing you had been building, without quite knowing that you were building it, suddenly became audible to the people around you, where the years of work crystallized into something that others could finally see? Because that is what 1967 was for Engelbert Humperdinck. Not the beginning, the arrival of what had always been building. The arrival was dramatic. Dickie Valentine fell ill on a Sunday night in January of 1967. The producers of Sunday Night at the London Palladium needed a replacement quickly. Engelbert Humperdinck had a record on a shelf at Decca Release Me, a country ballad that had been recorded and released with minimal promotion. He appeared on the most watched television program in Britain and sang. The next morning, 80,000 orders arrived at Decca. Within a week, Release Me was at number 1. The Beatles had Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane ready to ship, 11 consecutive British number 1s behind them. The certainty of number 12 was, by every measure of commercial momentum, a settled fact. Release Me kept them off the top spot, not for a week, for 6 weeks. Paul McCartney has described Penny Lane as perhaps the best thing the Beatles ever recorded. It peaked at number 2. Because a man who had spent 15 years in nightclubs and 6 months in a hospital and a decade being told the room wasn't right, sang one song on a Sunday night, and 80,000 people went out the next morning to find it. He spent 56 weeks total on the British charts with that song. It went to number 1 in 11 countries. The same year, The Last Waltz reached number 1 in Britain in November. He was the most successful new artist in the country in the year 1967. He had been in the music business for 15 years. He was 31 years old. And then, in 1976, After the Lovin'. And before that, A Man Without Love. And Quando, Quando, Quando. And Spanish Eyes. And Please Release Me No, that was the same song. He sold 140 million records. He performed for the Queen. He performed for presidents. He performed residencies at Las Vegas that ran for 17 years, the longest continuous Las Vegas residency in the history of that city. He received 4 Grammy nominations. He received a Golden Globe. He received stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and the Las Vegas Walk of Fame and the Leicester Walk of Fame. And through all of it, through the number 1s and the world tours and the Las Vegas residencies and the sold-out stadiums in Australia and Japan and Brazil and Germany, Patricia was there. The woman who had met him at the Leicester Palais de Danse when he was 20 and she was 17, and who had said yes and meant it, and who had stayed when staying was the harder option. She was not a stage wife, not a managed presence, not the woman who was photographed at award shows and nowhere else. She was, in the structure of his life, the thing that made all the rest of the structure possible. He has said, "She was the positive force that anchored my life." He has said it in many different ways across many different interviews across 6 decades, and it has never sounded like a prepared answer. It has always sounded like the most obvious fact in the room. The Alzheimer's disease arrived gradually, as it arrives, not with a specific moment, with increments, small losses of specific things, each increment representing the permanent departure of something irreplaceable. He watched it happen across more than a decade. He arranged his touring schedule around her care. He sought stem cell therapy in Germany when it was described as promising. He sought every treatment that was available or that might become available. In January of 2021, when both contracted COVID-19 and Patricia stopped eating and drinking, he posted on social media asking his fans, the loyal, enormous, international audience of people who had been listening since 1967, for a miracle. It was not a performance. He was asking for one. Patricia Healey Dorsey died on the 4th of February, 2021. She was 85 years old. They had been married for 57 years. He said, "I lost my darling." He said it, and then he said something else, something that changes what you understand about everything that happened on every stage in every country across 5 decades. He said, "Since I've lost her, I'm reading the lyrics of a song differently. There's more heart in it, there's more soul in it." That sentence. More heart in it, more soul in it, from a man who had been singing love songs professionally for 60 years, and who was, in the year after his wife's death, singing them differently. Not worse. More. The songs had always been about love, about its presence, its loss, its persistence, its cost. He had always known what he was singing. And now, at 85 years old, he knew it differently, and the knowing was in the voice, and the voice was changed. He is still here. At 89 years old, in 2025 and 2026, Engelbert Humperdinck continues to perform. He has announced dates in multiple countries. The younger audiences who were not alive in 1967 have found him through streaming platforms. A Man Without Love accumulated 15 million Spotify streams after appearing in the Marvel series Moon Knight. Quando appeared in a Netflix fight sequence. The voice that has been in the culture for 60 years is being discovered by people in their 20s who did not know they had been hearing it for years already. He was knighted in the 2023 King's Birthday Honours. Sir Arnold George Dorsey, the boy from Madras and Leicester, the nightclub singer, the tuberculosis survivor, the man who changed his name to something preposterous and made the world remember it, is Sir Engelbert Humperdinck. He said of the honor, "I never dreamed this would happen to a boy like me." He said it with the specific, unguarded quality of someone who has been surprised by a life that exceeded every expectation and who has not become accustomed to the exceeding. There is something in Engelbert Humperdinck's story that the 140 million records and the Las Vegas record and the Sunday night appearance that stopped the Beatles do not contain. It is in the voice. Not the technical properties of the voice, not the range or the breath control or the ease in the upper register. The thing that is in the voice now that was not in the voice in 1958. The nightclub years, the tuberculosis, the return to the clubs, Patricia saying yes at 17 and meaning it for 57 years. The Alzheimer's arriving in increments, the posting for a miracle in January of 2021 and the miracle not arriving. The reading of the lyrics differently. A voice is not just a mechanism, it is a record of the person who has spoken with it. Every experience deposited something in the voice of Arnold George Dorsey, and what was deposited is audible. Not as sadness, not as damage, but as depth. The specific depth of someone who has been to places that most voices have not been, and who has come back with those places inside them, and who sings about love with the authority of someone who understands. From the inside, what love requires, and what it costs, and what it leaves behind when it is gone. He has said, "I want to keep singing as long as God gives me the ability to sing." He said it with the specific clarity of a man who understands what the singing is for, and who has not been given a reason to stop. The voice that survived tuberculosis and Patricia's death and 60 years of nightclubs and Las Vegas residencies and the Beatles and everything else is still available. He still reads the lyrics differently now. He still finds more heart in them, more soul. And the people in the room can still hear it. What is the thing in your voice, literally or figuratively, that is there now that was not there before the hardest things happened? And what would it mean for the people listening if you stopped holding it back? Leave a comment below, because that is the question Engelbert Humperdinck has been answering since January of 1967, when he walked out in front of the entire nation and sang, and 80,000 people went out the next morning to find the voice they had heard the night before. If this story found something in you, subscribe and tell me in the comments, which Engelbert Humperdinck song means the most to you? Because the most important performance he has ever given may not be any specific song. It may be the accumulation of all of them, the nightclub years, and the tuberculosis, and the Patricia years, and the after Patricia years, all deposited in a voice that the world has been hearing for 60 years, and that is still, at 89, still going, still finding more heart in it, still finding more soul.